Hello, good people. It is a massive decision on Monday for all Canadians. The federal election will be coming to a close, and we got lots to talk about, okay? Now, I will be voting Conservative in this election. I have voted Liberal before. I have no ties to any party, but as a young family man with a young son, wife and I both working, I'm voting Conservative for many reasons. I mean, we'll dive more into that throughout the video, but I would like to watch this video with the great Jordan Peterson. Watch it, comment, react, give my opinions to what he's saying, and go for there. So without further ado, let's bring this up and let's get going.
I can understand why Canadians think he's the man for the moment, because he was vetted, for example, by the Brits who put him in charge of the Bank of England. But I can also tell you what happened when he was in charge of the Bank of England. And I know this because I know people who were affected, and I mean rich people, who were affected by his decisions as head of the Bank of England. So the policies that Carney put forward as the head of the Bank of England produced an asset boom. And what that means is that stock prices went upward radically. And what that meant was that the people who have a tremendous amount of money got a lot more money as a consequence of Carney's maneuvering. And that, I would say, shows you that's a good case example of exactly who he prioritizes despite his protestations when push comes to shove. And so the people that I've been talking to, and these are very wealthy people and they're very well connected, although they have a conscience, as it turns out, we're not very happy that the quantitative ease.
That's a good point. So Carney is publicly very, very wealthy, which is not a bad thing. I mean, I think we all strive to be very wealthy. Not all of us, but a lot of us. So do you think that a very, very extremely wealthy person gets to that point by always looking after the little guy? Of course not. Of course not. That's why every CEO has not every, but most CEOs have a little bit of narcissism or a few sociopathic traits, because you have to be a bit, your empathy has to be toned down a bit. You have to be a bit selfish to get to those points. That's just a fact, in my opinion. Sorry, I got to say in my opinion now. In my opinion, you have to be like that to get to that point. So it's just that alone. I mean, you could say the same thing about, Pierre, like a lifelong politician. What drives someone to get into politics? That's a whole nother discussion as well. I mean, I think you got to have those characteristics to get into politics as well. I mean, you have to kind of crave that attention, crave that power. But just an interesting point that Carney's being labeled as this like liberal fight for the little guy, when in reality, I mean, he's a banker. He's a banker, people. He's worth who knows how many millions of dollars. He's not for the working class, in my opinion. Anyway, let's continue here.
Principles that Carney put into place in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis made the rich much richer and the rest of everyone else, and that meant everyone but the extremely rich, substantially poorer. And so that's an example of what happened when Carney was running the Bank of England. And so there's no evidence that he's like a friend of yours. And so, okay. Now, then we might address another issue. It's like the issue of Trump and his saber rattling. Well, the accusations that have gone out with regards to Pierre Poilievre is that Poilievre is just MAGA light. He's a Make America Great advocate, which he's not, by the way.
Yeah, Maple
and
MAGA.
that a vote for Poilievre is really a vote for the Trump types. Well, let's see what Trump himself thinks. Well, a few days ago, when this was recorded, Trump came out and said he didn't give a damn who ran Canada. And so, we can conclude from that what we might as Canadians. One thing we can conclude, and, you want to put this in perspective, is that the new American administration has a lot of countries to keep track of. And Canada is the U.S.'s major trading partner, and we should get some due consideration. But that doesn't mean that the new administration has had Canada in its sights, so to speak, or even understands the Canadian political landscape particularly well. And it's my impression, and I've done some digging, that Trump didn't understand that his comments about Canada and the tariffs and his promised threat to turn Canada into the 51st state would be utilized by the Liberals to resurrect them from the well-deserved death they had already managed and to raise them up above the Conservatives. He didn't know that.
Now, that's another great point. I mean, people forget. People have short memories. So the Liberals were dead in the water a few months back. Trump single-handedly has raised, like Jordan just said there, has raised the Liberals out of the ashes like a phoenix. They were dead in the water. This is a point. This is what I don't understand. And there's 10 years of our country going to shit. Let's call it what it is. Housing prices are insane. Insane. Housing prices are insane. The economy's slowing down. We have nothing in Canada anymore. I mean, we used to have lumber. We used to have oil, gas. We used to have all these different industries. We have none of them anymore. So we are trying to continue to be a first world country without producing anything except real estate. That is our biggest commodity right now, is real estate in Canada. Our prices just keep going up, so people in the market have all this equity in their house. I mean, I saw this graph where it was like a line graph of like countries that had the highest rise in housing costs like since year 2000. Canada was like triple the triple number 2. And I think number 2 was actually like the UK, which is also in shambles, also in a very similar situation to Canada. So, yeah, I don't know. I just think the whole thing that, we got to vote Liberal because of Trump, it's all bullshit, man. I don't think Trump really cares about Canada as much as the media is trying to make you think. I really, truly... When you look at our population compared to the U.S., we are just a little blip to them. Sure, we do have lots of trade back and forth. It is going to affect them in some way or another if they implement tariffs this way or that way. I get it, but we don't need to vote based on Trump. Trump is also, most likely gone in 3.5 years, right? We don't need to decide our next 4 years based on one man tweeting some things, okay? So he single-handedly just resurrected the Liberals is the point I'm making. I'm rambling here, but he's just single-handedly, the Conservatives would have swept this election. It's also why I don't believe the polls, though. I think the media is manipulating this. I think the polls, no one's phoned me. Literally no one has phoned me asking me who I'm voting for. Everyone I talk to under 50 is voting Conservative. And I'm in British Columbia, just to give you guys some awareness on where I'm at. So I know BC is different and the election is going to be decided back east. I get that. Everyone over 50 is voting Liberals, everyone under 50. So I think it's just about turnouts. Do the young turn out more or the older? And I mean, typically, the older generations do turn out to vote more. I just think it's going to be different. I think young families are just sick of not having enough money to buy a house in this country. I think that alone is enough. Anyway, let's continue.
Fair enough, but it doesn't matter because he didn't. And so I don't know if he would have cared if he did know, but he didn't know. But the upshot is the Liberals have leapt ahead. Now, then you might say that's no problem because Mark Carney, man, he's got the international cachet to put that orange-haired son of a bitch in his place. And then you might think, well, what does Trump think about that? And what Trump said was he'd rather negotiate with a Liberal. Now, you could say, well, that's because he thinks Carney is much more confident and competent than Poilievre, who he described as no friend to him and no friend to the MAGA movement, by the way. Or you could read it, and I would read it this way, knowing something about Trump, that because Trump is radically pro-American and because the free trade era has radically come to an end, that Trump is looking at Canada thinking if Canadians are foolish enough to elect that piker Carney, who's a retread of the worst of Trudeau, although much more effective on the managerial front, let's say, then we'll be able to crush him extremely effectively at the negotiating table. We have contempt for everything he stands for, and that would be a real good thing for us Americans as we pursue our own self-interest. And so if you think that Trump is intimidated by Carney and his international expertise, you don't understand the Americans, and you certainly don't understand Trump. Because not only is that not the case, and I know it's not the case because I have extensive contacts in DC, which I have carefully developed over the last 5 years, precisely for moments like this. And they tell me what's going on. It's not like Trump and the MAGA Republicans think that Carney is a credible, canny negotiator that's going to bring them to heel. Quite the bloody contrary. Now, can Poilievre step up and do a better job than Carney? Well, Canadians tend to get overshadowed at the bargaining table with regards to the Americans because they're very...
It's another great point. I mean, to play... I mean, I am biased in this conversation because, like I said, I will be supporting the Conservatives in this upcoming election. But that's a good point. I mean, let's call a spade, as they say. Is Poilievre, if he gets elected, which I actually do think he will. I mean, we'll get into that. I think the polls are wrong. I think he will win I think he'll win in a minority government. Anyway, will he be great? He might suck. I mean, we don't know. If I'm telling you, Pierre Poilievre is going to be the savior of Canada, do I believe that? No. Do I believe that all politicians kind of suck? Yeah, I do. Do I think he's the best out of a group of people that are probably not all great and not all bad? Yeah, I do. So I'm not going to sit here and say Pierre Poilievre is going to be the savior of Canada. It might be bad. It could be worse. Honestly, you have to be honest with yourself. You don't know. We don't know if he's just going to get into power and change his policies and stranger things have happened is all I'm saying. But you gotta pick a side. You really do. When you're voting, you're picking a side. That's what you're doing, and you gotta pick a side based on the little information you have. I mean, so let's just be honest with ourselves on that point.
We have a lot to learn in that regard, but what we could do and perhaps would do with a Conservative government, if they got their act together, is foster Canadian independence from the United States in a very real way, remove borders to interprovincial trade, crisscross the country with pipelines, radically improve our fossil fuel-based economy, move our refining capacity back into Canada, develop something approximating a real industrial policy, and maybe on something approximating a wartime footing, given the magnitude of the threat from the Americans, deal more effectively with the Germans and the Japanese, for example, who've already indicated their inexhaustible thirst for Canadian resources, make ourselves into the industrial powerhouse that Canada could most clearly be, indicate our willingness to contribute to military defense in the manner that we should, given the necessity for that in an increasingly unstable world, signal to the Americans thereby that we're willing to pursue our weight, but that we don't bloody well need them if push comes to shove, and then sit down with them at the negotiating table like a real competitor and contender and potential ally. And if you think it's going to happen under Carney, well, you can take Trump at his word. He already indicated his contempt for the liberal types. And he said that, he's no friend of Poilievre. Well, you want to read behind the lines a little bit. And as far as I can tell, what that means is that Trump would rather deal with a contemptible, weak-kneed liberal than with a conservative who actually puts Canada first. And so don't be thinking that Carney's...
No, 100%. 100%. People are saying... Yeah, actually, I'll let it run here. With the cachet
to put Trump back on his heels, because Trump has faced people who are a lot more intimidating than Carney. And it's not only that, Carney stands for everything that the more radical fringe of the Democratic Party stands for in the United States. And it's not like Trump has any sympathy for the Democrats as a whole, and certainly not for the more leftist eco-fringe of the Democrats. And it's clearly the case that if Carney was an American politician, he'd be Gavin Newsom. Like, he'd be exactly the sort of person that's pushed exactly
100%.
the policies that Trump can't tolerate that have emanated from the Democrats. And so it's a delusion. So Carney has a very impressive resume, read shallowly. And I can understand why Canadians are relying on that as an indicator of his competence. And they're also hopeful that he's a new guy, which he most certainly isn't. But if you look into what he's actually done and what the consequences have been, and if you actually assess what he said in his book, Values, for example, where it's written down in black and white, you find that if we elect Carney in Canada, which at the moment looks like a reasonable likelihood, we're facing the same situation that we faced under Trudeau, except Carney will be more effective at implementing it. And so we're going to...
You know what I just thought of? It's a bit off subject here, but Jordan did interview Pierre Poilievre, and I think he opened it up by saying, the next Prime Minister of Canada, unless something, in my dumb terms, it was translated, unless something insane happens, unless something crazy happens, and that's what we're talking about polls. That's what the polls were showing. It was leading by like 20% or something, 20 points, but it is kind of crazy that he says that a couple weeks later, the whole Trump thing comes out, the 51st state, the Trudeau stepping down, Carney being brought in, the tariff war, the blah, 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 which, by the way, nothing's really happened so far. Anyway, so let's continue here. But maybe Jordan Peterson gave Pierre Poilievre the kiss of death. That's what I'm saying.
With a lot more virtue signaling, and that's hard to believe because, Trudeau virtue signaled to a degree that was virtually impossible as he impoverished Canada
100%.
To no positive end whatsoever on the environmental front. And all that's going to happen is that's going to be much worse under Carney. So we already see that Carney set at serious odds, for example, with Danielle Smith in Alberta. And that's a continuation of the scrap that Smith and the West has been having with Trudeau and the Liberals and the East as a whole. That's not going to rectify itself. It isn't even obvious to me that the country itself, which the Liberals for the last 10 years have regarded as an entity with no real central identity anyways, it isn't obvious to me at all that the country's going to be able to survive another 4-year round of liberal, utopian, globalist, environmentalist, net zero catastrophe.
It's a real thing.
And so don't be thinking that Carney...
Like, that's a real thing. I just have to say that. That is a real thing. Like, I think people have this delusion because we do have it so good. We've had it so good in Canada that you think that we can make all these terrible, terrible decisions as a country and we can destroy industries and we can make housing unaffordable, that you think that no matter what, we're just always going to be fine. That's not true. That's just something you have to accept. If we keep going down this path, this trajectory, we will not be a great country anymore. We're on the edge of it already. Okay? My wife is from South Africa. When her parents were growing up there, it was a great place to be. Okay? It was an amazing place to be. People immigrated to South Africa. And this is a weird example, but I'm getting to a point here. Now, all her family's immigrating out. It is almost unlivable there because it's so dangerous. The government has implemented the government has done just horrific things down there in South Africa and destroyed the country where their dollar is worthless, where people have worked their whole lives and they sell their house and it equates to having like 40,000 euros, where like cell phones cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars down there. Like this is a real thing that can happen. And that happened over someone's lifetime. That can happen in Canada. Don't kid yourself, especially with the U.S. pulling back from being our partner and things. That can honestly happen. Anyway, let's let Jordan finish here. Get me worked up.
And don't be thinking that his stellar resume indicates that he's going to produce some kind of economic revival in Canada, because all the evidence points to the fact that he's going to continue to pursue the net zero delusions that he's already established as the center of his entire edifice of thought. And if you don't believe me, and maybe you don't want to or can't, or you doubt me, read Values yourself And then you'll see, read the first 3 chapters and the last 3 chapters, because the middle of it's just boilerplate. It's only there to make the book thick instead of pamphlet length. And so an hour of reading and you'll figure out who Carney is.
Sorry, Jordan. That was a low-key passive-aggressive flame by Jordan. Jordan has written great books, obviously. Very successful author, and just flamed Carney's book there. That was hilarious. Oh my God.
If you believe that carbon dioxide output on the part of Canada constitutes an existential threat of the sort that requires us to become poverty-stricken over the next 40 years, well, we virtue signal about how the planet could be saved while doing absolutely nothing about actually addressing any true environmental problems, then Carney's your guy.
Yeah. I mean, fair enough. Also, you guys ever seen a lithium mine? Look up what that does to the environment. Anyway, it's nice to watch someone just a lot smarter than you that shares some ideas. Like, I have ideas in my head like Jordan Peterson, but how he articulates them is like unmatched. So that's why I like reacting, watching videos from not just him, from just different people, different topics. It makes you maybe 1% smarter watching someone like that speak. Anyway, guys, let me know in the comments who you guys voting for. Big election if you're Canadian. And if you were American, who would you vote for? Let me know. Or if you were from the UK, Australia, wherever, India, I mean, tell me who you'd vote for if you were Canadian. Anyway, catch you guys on the next one. Love y'all. Peace.